I'm here today to share with you some of the really interesting changes that we've observed on Lake Michigan. As Elena said, I work at Inland Seas Education Association, and I'll tell you all about what it is that we do and who we are. But the spoiler alert is that we've been doing citizen science since before it was the cool thing to do. And we've got a really cool track record of data. And so if you were here last month or you've watched the videos, you saw another program that does many of the same data collections or similar styles of data collection. So you'll hear a little bit about where our skills and programs overlap and where they're different. And also I wanted to focus on some of the data that we got so that you guys learned a little bit about the methods, and so we can see what these methods have been showing us about Lake Michigan. So that's where we'll be talking today. There we go. I just highlighted a state of the lake report here. I think it's really important for us all to consider how lucky we are to live in this state. We have abundant resources, but we don't realize how lucky we are, how threatened those can be. And even within the Great Lakes, the fact that in the last few years, we've had people who get their drinking water from a Great Lake not be able to use the drinking water in their house. This has become, more and more systemic, and we have abundant resources. So it's thinking about stewarding, being stewards of these Great Lakes resources is so important. In the context of we're stewards of the largest supply of this nation's water. And one of the largest supplies of surface freshwater on the planet. So it's just really good to put some context in. The little corner of the Great Lakes that we steward or call home is Sutton's Bay. It's right here. Our primary education vessel is the pretty sailboat you see there with bright red sails. That is the sailing vessel Inland Seas. She's a 78-foot schooner, and we take folks out on that schooner to do sampling. So our sampling is a little less precise, and we have far fewer technological pieces of equipment in the state of things that have batteries and screens, and we have a lot of mechanical advantage pulleys and those sorts of technologies aboard our vessel. So that's a little bit about the place that we educate from. We take that ship. Our primary home is in Grand Traverse Bay here, which is a part of Lake Michigan, and in the little inlet here of Sutton's Bay. But we travel for the last 3 years. We've been in 4 out of the 5 Great Lakes, I believe. And Lake Ontario keeps getting missed, but we'll get out there one of these days. We also recently bought another vessel, the Alliance, which will be coming home to Sutton's Bay through Lake Ontario. So we're going to get there this year from Virginia this spring. So if you're interested in hearing about a voyage like that, keep track of us on social media, because we'll be sort of sharing tidbits of that. And I think it's going to be a fun way. A lot of our teachers are planning on sort of zooming in on where the Inland Seas or where the Alliance is going to be. They're following along. Anyway, so our mission is to inspire a lifetime of Great Lakes curiosity, stewardship, and passion in people of all ages. And here's some pictures. We are all about the experiential component of authentic, using scientific equipment to collect samples and then analyzing them. So you can see we've got people holding fish that are collected with an otter trawl here. We take a 10 minutes sample every single trip. We take the same sample. And so What you'll hear a little bit about is that we've got a longitudinal data set that shows us what happens when you go fishing for 10 minutes in the same place over 30 years, what you catch. But in the moment, in the 3 hours you spend with us, you're immersed in touching, holding, measuring those fish, or searching for macroinvertebrates on plant life, or in the benthos, the bottom of the Great Lakes. We take a scoop of that, or examining plankton under a microscope. There's another picture of mud. So if you don't get plant life, you get mud life. And so these are just ways that we bring the Great Lakes to life, and the different parts of the Great Lakes food web to life. And so when someone steps foot on our ship, we say that they are going to be 3 things. And we say this whether you're a 4th grader, a 12th grader, or a 27th grader. We say that you're going to be sailors, scientists, and stewards, because those are the things that matter a lot to us. And so you act as a scientist for the day. You are the ones who are collecting those plankton samples, who are dropping the Secchi disc. You are the ones helping to throw our fish net, our otter trawl, over the side of the ship, and recording the latitude and longitude. So you are doing that work. And then you were a sailor, you help us raise the sails. You help coil the lines, you help bring up the anchor, you do all of the things that sailors need to do to successfully manage a vessel. And we hope when you leave that, because of the connection, the emotional experience you've had, which we hope is a good one, you leave caring a little more, knowing a little more about the Great Lakes, and wanting to be a steward of that space. One of the best ways to be a steward, because we aren't all lucky enough to live right on the water, is that connection to watershed, right? I think a recent study, and I can't, said something like upwards of 60% of people can't define what a watershed is. It's and we all live in one, or we can say we know we live in one, but what it actually is. And watershed stewardship is the most important way we can protect the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes are experiencing a lot of pressure from a lot of different angles, for sure. And so, and we'll get into what our data says about that in a couple of minutes. But I think it's important to show someone that protecting their own watershed is the best way to steward the Great Lakes. So we have, in the last few years, expanded onto on-land programs into our watershed, as an example of ways that we can learn about and monitor our watershed so that we can be better stewards of the Great Lakes. We do that through things like macroinvertebrate collection, which maybe you're familiar with, and water quality, water chemistry tests of streams, but we also take transects of the riparian zone. So we look at the area surrounding a water body immediately adjacent to a stream or a coastline, and we check it out. How resilient is it to flooding? How is it contributing to filtering pollutants and other things? How is it acting as a nursery for our native fish and plants? And so we explore some of those things as well. We also really think it's important to focus and highlight the careers that are here on the Great Lakes, because the next generation of stewards are also our next generation of sailors, of freighter captains, of construction workers that are building homes and seawalls and things on the Great Lakes. And so choices that we make in our careers can also be really impactful, and we can impact in positive and negative ways. So we talk about things like navigation. We have a navigation program that teaches you all the math necessary to navigate and how to use a compass and chart a course, and how to use an ROV to operate, to find sunken ships, and what the Coast Guard does with sunken ships if they get found. And so talking through some of those activities. So those are other ways that we connect kids to, and anybody to the Great Lakes. Through the work that we've done, we've been around for over 30 years, and every time a class signs up to go out with us, we thank them because you signed up, we get to go out and take another sample. And so for over 30 years, we have gone out from when the boat can get out on the water to the, early in May to the second to last or sometimes last week in October. And we take folks out, and when we go out, we take a set of samples. And so twice a day for many of the days between May and October, we have data on the fish populations, on the plankton populations, on what's happening at the bottom, the benthos of the Great Lakes. You see a Secchi disc, which if you were here last month, you heard about as a way to, we'll talk about what that is in just a minute, but looking at clarity, exploring plankton, the light levels, how far down the light goes. We also take air temperature, we take water temperature at the surface, we take water temperature at the bottom, and when I say we, I mean the students, the participants, whoever's out on a trip is taking that data. So I'm going to highlight some of what our data shows for us today. Yeah. So I think, what does it mean to monitor? I think that's a great analogy question I like to start, and sometimes we'll talk about this, especially with younger groups on the ship. If you think of your favorite movie and you freeze frame it, what are you learning about your favorite movie? If you show me your favorite movie, what can I know about it in one frame, right? In one frame of a football game, is this a kickoff return? Is it the game-winning extra point? What's going on in that frame? In this frame over here with poor old Charlie Brown, what happened with the football there, right? So one moment doesn't tell the whole story. It just tells one thing. And there's a lot we can get from that, but it doesn't tell us everything. And so I like to think about monitoring efforts or longitudinal studies as watching the full movie or getting a chance to read the full story. And so every single sail is one frame, right? Is Charlie Brown laying on the grass in shame, knowing he shouldn't have tried to kick the ball again. But over 30 years, each class that's contributed data helps us to paint the picture or tell a story of the health of the Great Lakes. And so what you see on the screen here is a Secchi disc. I also wore my Secchi disc earrings for the occasion. And a Secchi disc is light and dark colored. It's black and white, and that's just, it's high contrast. I have a 4-month-old at home. And so I know that that's the first thing a baby can see, right? That's why books are in black and white for little babies, so they can see high contrast. It's really easy for our eyes to pick up. And so that high contrast object gets dropped into the water. We do this at 5 different locations on our ship, and we take the average data. We drop it down and we see how far down we can see that Secchi disc, right? And that is going to tell us how clear the water is. And it tells us something about how far the sunlight penetrates. But going back to that analogy, what can one single measurement of clarity tell us? Probably not a lot. But if you take a measure every day for, say, the whole sailing season, then you can get at a story. So this is 2018, and our x-axis is May through October. So we aren't out any earlier than May, and we put the boat to bed in October. And ice, not this year, but most years, covers the bay for a good portion of that. So we wouldn't be able to get a Secchi depth another way, but we have these summer months. And so what we see is the average monthly Secchi depth in Sutton's Bay. The y-axis is depth in meters. I think you probably all can notice that it starts out, you can see pretty far down in May and June, but by the end of summer into September, it's almost half the depth, going from 16 meters to, well, sometimes it's 8, I guess that's 10, so less than half, but you can see a lot less far down. The clarity decreases. And so what does that mean? As a person who likes to go swimming, maybe you love clear water, so you prefer swimming in June. But as a fish or a native clam, that might say something else about your preferences, right? And this is one season. What is it doing over multiple years? And it asks, a scientist then asks the question, why is it doing that, right? And so we tell that story through the data that we collect, I guess is how I'll say that. Before we put the monthly to bed, I want to show you another interesting trend, because we can look at this data not just for 1 year, but for 30 something years. This is our monthly averages in Secchi depth from 1995 to 2005. All right. So you can see the trend is a little less obvious, but you can see that early in the season, you can see a little more deeply. By the end of the season, at the end of summer, you can see a little less deeply, right? The clarity decreases. You also might notice these little whisker bars. That's what the data over the years is showing us, the variability, right? And so I want to pull back to 2018 and notice this 1 year we were at around 17 meters in May and June. The average from 1995 to 2005 is about 11 meters. In September, it's about 10. All right. So interesting. Now we're going to look at the same monthly averages whisker chart, but instead of 95 to 2005, we're going to look from 2010 to 2020. Something's happening. Something interesting is happening. That trend of being able to see really, really far down early in the season is a lot more obvious in more recent years. And so scientists ask why.